Welcome to Outside the Box with Asendia USA, a podcast educating US-based e-tailers on international shipping topics and how they can expand their global e-commerce footprint.
Hello, everybody. This is Nick Agnetti, host of Outside the Box podcast with Asendia USA with my co-host, John Walsh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Special guest today, Jason Rowland, Director, VP, maybe even President of Compliance of Asendia USA and other subsidiaries. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Is your official
Thanks for
title
having me.
Risk and Compliance Officer?
It would be.
Wow.
You have many titles, though.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Director of Compliance is one.
Okay.
And how many do you
Perfect.
have? How many titles do you have?
One here for the U.S., one for Europe. Yeah.
What's
Don't
your
you have one
Europe?
in Mexico, too? Senior
Mexico
Compliance?
Senior. It
Yeah,
gets very country specific.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Gracias. Okay, so we are going to move forward today to have a very interesting conversation concerning compliance and maybe even, I don't know if we're going to breach into legality, but we've got a lot of things to get after, and I think we should start with, what do you think, John, HS codes? Is that okay with you? Or do you want to go somewhere else?
Sure.
You want to walk down
No,
a
we
different
were
path?
just talking about it, so go ahead.
We were.
Let's go
Okay,
there.
so we'll, from the perspective of working with a shipper, right, an online brand, somebody that is shipping goods internationally, because quick refresher for everybody, since I know that you all devoutly listen to, our show and watch it and like it and subscribe and share it with your friends, your family, and closest relatives, that we focus on helping online brands making cross-border shipping easier, cross-border logistics easier, right? And so one thing that's very vitally important, though, is understanding the importance of HS codes. So,
Yeah.
Jason, can you talk to us a little bit about what they mean, what they represent, what the actual digits mean to different countries, different things?
Yeah.
All things.
Obviously, when you're moving things internationally, there's ways that countries do import and export regulation, right?
Okay.
And one of the things that they have to do is make sure that the item that you're sending is properly coded, is properly taxed, is properly dutied, is safe to be transported on a plane, safe to be transported via ocean, or however the route is that you're looking to move it. They need to make sure that the item that they're moving on your behalf is known.
Okay.
So one of the ways that they do that is they have this system called the HS code system. It's a harmonized tariff system.
Globally, right?
Yeah,
Globally.
and the first 6 digits of that code are an HS code, and that code is going to tell the inbound customs authority exactly what this item is that you're sending. Is it clothing? Is it a mahogany table? Is it a fridge? Whatever the item is going to have a code associated with it.
Okay.
It's not too far removed from like a SKU or a barcode that you would imagine would be necessary to do that kind of a transaction. It's an individually specific number for each type of item that they know this is what we should expect to see in this box if we were to open it up.
It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so those first 6 digits are going to be the item, right? It's going to be generic, universal to
Standardized?
every country, right?
Standardized,
They all
right.
use the same 6
Okay.
digits. After that, right, you can get more specific.
Okay.
And then those are where we get into the up to 8 digits or up to 10 digits. And those are for more country-specific items, where countries will have different interpretations of the types of items that they will and won't accept, right? So some countries, I can send dog food from the United States into some countries, and I can't send it to other countries.
Like Canada.
Like Canada specifically.
Yes.
right?
Canada's a whole other story.
So if those 6 and 8 digit extensions of an HS code are country specific and really let them get granular on yes, this is a cotton t-shirt, but it's a 50% synthetic blend as opposed to just a straight cotton t-shirt.
Sure.
Or it's made from other agricultural byproducts like silk or something that is either chemically made or something that is naturally occurring, like fur or silk or something like that. So it allows you to get really granular on what your item is so that it can be taxed properly, so that it can be imported properly. And then everyone knows exactly what they're expecting. Because there's obviously different thoughts on agriculture, right? If it's an animal byproduct or something like that, then some people, they don't want it, or they do want it, or they want to charge more for it, or that kind of thing.
I mean, what's the latest on the fur trades? I'm kidding.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that it would be one
Yeah.
of those things that would still be around or would still
Probably
be
is, though.
necessary. But yeah, it's you can't. There are some countries where you can't just pick up and send them a fur coat, right?
So, no,
So
yeah.
one thing that seems to be an issue is supplements, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
That
yeah.
seems to be the main one. That seems to be a lot of confusion, I guess. Is that the right word? Or
Well, it's one of the areas where there's more
regulation?
varied differentiation between different countries.
Correct.
Where some countries will allow, hey man, send us whatever you want. It doesn't matter. We're good. Like we'll
Right.
we'll worry about the value of it and deal with
Right.
the tax and we'll have it delivered. But other countries say no, we don't necessarily want our people having access to that kind of an item or that type of a supplement, or we'd rather them buy it domestically. So we won't allow import of that kind of
a little
item
more
into our country,
nationalistic
a little more-
mentality.
right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the driving force behind the HS codes and what they are and why they're used in the international shipping community.
So when you talk about them, they're so popular. Everybody's on some.
Well, they're required, right?
Right.
So in order to get your
Right.
material accepted by a
Yeah.
customs authority, it's one of the line items in the data that has to be there. And so internationally, we started with a regulation called ICS2, and
Right.
that's really where a lot of this stuff started to pop up, and words like HS code became more common vernacular for the industry. Before, it didn't really matter. Nobody was really looking to see what these items were to make sure that the item in the box was what was on the paperwork for the
Really? So
And it
ICS2 was a pivot?
ICS2 was definitely a pivot point when now all of a sudden customs authorities are looking at the data. They are rejecting items. If they do spot checks and they find out that the item in the box is not the one you said it was in the data, great, now this item is going to be on hold and it's not going to get to its final destination until you rectify the issue with the data and change the code or resend it over again, depending on what it is.
Let's let ICS2, do you want to just explain what it stands for?
Yeah, it's a international customs regulation, right? That deals with mainly material into the
EU.
European Union,
Yeah.
right? And it's their kind of attempt at getting hold of what was
Reeling it in.
previously a real Wild West type.
Because the first version had to deal with more commercial material. The second version, which is the 2 import control system 2, has to deal with individual direct consumer,
Correct.
goods. And that's where the control, it's an extra added security measure to help keep EU citizens safe, and I think it's very interesting because there was a huge lead up or build up to it, and then all of a
Years,
sudden
yeah.
it was like, well, nothing's really happening. And
Right.
now we find out that, okay, now we're actually going to start policing this more going into probably Q4, or has it started already?
So yeah, it's officially up and running. The problem is that different inbound countries have been turning it on slowly.
Okay.
Right, where they're actually doing these checks now, spot checks.
Inbound to the EU.
Inbound into the
Okay.
EU, right? So eventually there'll be a more robust check of these things that are going on. It could even reach up to 100%, where if you're not having your HS code match your item description or physically what's in the box, they could start enforcing it at a level of 100% to say that nothing is going to come in to our country unless it has a valid and applicable HS code, and that code matches what we're physically seeing in the box.
Gosh, that's so significant.
It's gonna
It is.
get more and more
Yeah.
cumbersome, I guess, for companies and shippers to deal with in terms of how they're going to move their things internationally. It's definitely going to be a wake-up call for a lot of companies if they're not ahead of their catalogs and making sure that they have proper HS codes and more importantly, good HS capable descriptions. Right, that's the thing.
Not generic.
Not generic,
Right.
right? So you're not
That's
just
the
going to be
problem.
able to say merchandise or car part or
Especially on these
clothing.
marketplaces.
What
right?
about gift? I'm kidding.
Oh, don't even go there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely one of the famous examples of what we used
Oh,
to be
I
able
know.
to get away with. And
All the time.
We're not going to be able to do that anymore. Yeah.
Oh, good. Good.
No, I was just so on that. So that was it. ICS2 was implemented as a go live. I think it was March of 2022, 2023, 22.
Yeah.
Right,
It's
something like.
been over a year.
Yeah. So and then because we were coached to basically just be really diligent with our clients and make sure that we were doing catalog reviews and looking at if we were to pull a batch tracking and look at SKU, look at it on a granular level, like you mentioned, to say, hey, you're not even giving us HS codes, so at least give us a 6-digit. You know what I mean? At least give us something.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for the listeners and potentially viewers out there to know that I'm not just trying to be a pain in the butt if you're one of my clients, that I am trying to make it so that way, ultimately what it's going to come down to is this. It's going to come down to either a good, a better, or a poor customer experience.
Sure.
So it's going to be, we haven't even gotten into, ISS registrations and those impacts. We're talking about just security measures right now in terms of what, customs authorities are requiring for shipments going to the EU. EU is home to top, number 3 largest e-commerce market globally is the UK, and then from there, Germany I think is number 5 or number 4, maybe number 4 or 5, one of the two, and then a bunch of the EU countries are in there too. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, to make a long story longer, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to use that one, but I did hear that one today, and I thought it was great.
It's a little nugget you dropped there.
Hey, 10-piece coming your way. 10-piece coming your way. Okay. No, but it's so important if you're listening and if you're watching that if you do not have your catalog up to date with accurate HS codes, you got to get on that now, especially if you're shipping into the UK is probably a little different just because of Brexit. They're not really part of the EU, and the ICS2 is really more of an EU control. But I'm positive if you're shipping internationally, you're shipping to France, Germany, Spain, Italy, those countries, right? And you got to have it together for those types of things.
Yeah, and at a minimum, it's going to be something where if you're not ahead of it now, just because the country that you're sending things to doesn't happen to be enforcing it yet, it's coming.
For
It's
sure.
one of those things it's going to come in. You're going to start seeing things questioned and rejected at the border if they don't have these things in place now.
Yeah.
Do you notice a lot of customers confuse SKUs with HS codes? Right?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everyone is starting to learn the difference between the two, and they're starting to really, because it's becoming more prevalent throughout the industry, and it's like a pain point now, right? So things are starting to get stopped, which means companies are starting to have delays, and then they want to know why, and they want to fix it. So I think at this point, they're starting to learn more of what this big, scary thing in the corner is these big HS codes that are starting to, rear their head in terms of their logistics, and it's starting to require solutions.
I know we were doing we were talking when we were going to have you on the podcast. Talk about Canada in that regard for a minute.
Yeah, Canada specifically has more of stringent requirements, right? So they want to see not only 6 digits, but then sometimes they want to see 8 or 10 digit, right, of their specific code for an item, so that they can move that item more fluidly through their network. And it is one of those things where your companies are going to need a leg up. They're going to need a little help. They're going to need the ability to take their catalog to somebody and say, hey, listen, I have a 6 digit, but I need accuracy of up to 90+% for 8 and 10 additional codes, right? So they want to see catalogs that are efficient and that they can send any item in that catalog up to Canada and have it cross a border and get delivered without delay or incurring additional costs from a customs broker or something like that has to go in and do it manually, or go in and adjust the data after the fact in order to help the clearance process out.
What do you, before we get too far, I think it's important I know I did like a very brief introduction, but maybe give the listeners and even viewers a little background on yourself, just to kind of build.
You jumped right in. You didn't give the guy a breath to talk about himself.
Well, let me tell you, you are a whole heap of help. So we'll start with that.
I have it right here. Ask him what he does. Right?
That's great. You didn't read it then.
Well, you jump right in.
Okay. Do you mind sharing?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
I came out of college and I started right with the U.S. government in doing transportation security with the TSA. And I did 11 years with the agency, last couple of which I was a lead transportation security inspector out of JFK, where we were responsible for making sure that air carriers and the airport itself, like the airport authority, Port Authority here in the U.S. and in New York, were following all the applicable federal rules and regulations that go along with owning and operating an airport. Those rules trickle down to the air carriers themselves and passenger and cargo operations, and then also indirect air carriers like Asendia, who are responsible for putting material on passenger planes.
Yep.
And there are a whole series of rules and regulations and handcuffs that go along with that kind of an environment, right?
Handcuffs.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that you either can or you can't do, right? And it's one of the big ones, I guess. People, one of the buzzwords for the industry here is known shippers, right? That's a big one, right?
Okay.
So that's another thing I think we'll probably get into a little bit here. But
Cross
yeah,
that
so
off
I
the
did.
list.
Cross.
Put that on the list. You don't have to ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, so
Okay.
after 11 years with the agency, I moved over to the private side, and it's been great ever since. Yeah,
You never looked back, huh?
never looked back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess since John already crossed it off the list, any chance you want to talk about known shippers?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that if people are getting into international shipping need to be aware of, right? Because it's
Okay.
one of the hurdles that you must cross
Oh,
in order to get your stuff out there. HS codes, while they are becoming one of those hurdles, we're not quite there yet, but the known shipper is definitely, bullet number one with what you have to accomplish in order to start moving your stuff internationally, especially if you want to do it quickly, meaning passenger airplanes.
Yep.
Right? You could always do cargo planes and that kind of thing. They're a little slower, they're a little more expensive. Passenger planes really are the way to go in terms of logistics.
So you have to have a physical address, and you have to be there.
Yeah, you have to have a physical address. It used to be different. You used to have that address in the 50 states, but now they're starting to have the ability to vet addresses in Mexico and Canada with a little more accuracy
Really?
too. Yeah.
The
But
known
at the
shipper
same time,
program. I didn't know that.
yeah, it actually originated it's based on a program that was started in Canada. The U.S. Kind of took it and ran with it and created it into the known shipper program that it
Done
is
that in
today.
a few countries, haven't we?
Yes,
Yeah.
we tend to do that a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good program. I think it has validity in terms of the security posture that it attempts to enforce on an industry
Okay.
and making sure that companies are owned and operated by legally, law-abiding, good people.
That's
right?
a good thing.
Making sure that-
It is.
right,
It's a good thing. How does one? Let's say I start a insert BigCommerce, Shopify, insert whatever brand. I start a brand, okay, and I'm utilizing one of these companies to operate my online store. How do I become a known shipper?
There's a few different ways, right? So basically, you need to be sponsored by an indirect air carrier or an air carrier, right? So those are the entryways into the system.
Okay.
So someone at a air carrier or an indirect air carrier like Asendia is going to put you into the system based on an address and phone number and name, and then that name is taken and vetted by the TSA. And a known shipper identifying number is issued to the company that is specific to the relationship between the carrier and the customer.
Yeah.
So you could be known to 50 other indirect air carriers, but if you're not known to the one who's moving your stuff today, that's when you get into a problem, right? So it's not a matter of just getting a number, getting vetted one time, and then you're good forever. You have to have that number specific to each international movement relationship that you have. And it's a requirement for the indirect air carrier to make sure that all their customers and everyone who's a source of material that gets sent internationally can be traced back to a known shipper.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So when I worked at UPS, UPS is obviously their mobile carrier.
Right.
But we had to get known shipper status
Right.
because we use commercial air.
Right.
But we didn't for UPS.
No, it's a requirement specifically for passenger airplanes.
So it'd be the same for because FedEx and UPS are their own airlines, really.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
passenger,
I'm only mentioning because customers never understood, well, you're UPS, you can't.
right?
We're like, no, we don't use UPS.
I mean, that's kind of a valid thought, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
it's a
you-
valid
if
point.
you're not
Yeah.
in this industry,
Yeah, you would
you're
think.
a new client, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I could understand that.
Yeah, cargo planes are their own
Yeah,
animal
yeah,
with their
own
own
animal,
set
right.
of rules and that kind of thing. But the known shipper program applies only specifically for passenger airplanes.
I had a question before we go off of Canada real quick. So I've learned, I have a large 3PL,
Yeah,
so we have to put the merchant name in. So they've shipped for other companies, it has to be in there. Why is that?
it's one of the specific. So again, it's one of those regulations where the Canadian customs enforcements right now are choosing to enforce rules that have always been on the books.
Really?
They're choosing to enforce them now, right? Whereas before they were a little more lenient on what they would allow.
Right.
Now I think is a time where everyone says, "Hey, we have this ICS2 thing coming."
Right.
Companies are getting more used to the idea of being regulated more stringently on what they're doing for international import and export. So let's just use this opportunity while it's in everyone's mind and get all these other things that we want to see done more effectively and efficiently. Let's start enforcing them so that we can
So-
kind of raise rising tide of compliance across the board.
Is that done so they can audit who the actual person shipping?
In the end, it's all about getting down to who the
what they're shipping?
actual shipper of record is and who they should be, instead of being able to get away with, as a 3PL, like, oh, I'm the shipper. It's my box that's getting, internationally moved. It's really their way of getting down to a more granular level and saying, no, where did this package originate? Is this something that a company purchased and that was sending? Is this something that they created with their own IP and then are shipping it and selling internationally? Right. But who is the actual source of the material? Because in the end, that's the person that you want to regulate. That's the person that you want to make sure is compliant with any applicable rules or laws.
How do the marketplaces get around it? Amazon, eBay? How do they do that?
Yeah, there are a lot of tricky workarounds, right, and things like that, where it comes to the regulatory environment is really starting to shift a little bit as e-commerce becomes more of the norm. Right. That there's going to have to be a way eventually where companies that are marketplaces can't vet 5 million sellers from across the country in order to say, hey, our material could come from any one of these 5 million different locations, right? Because especially if it's one of the larger marketplace sellers. So companies like Asendia and other logistics carriers have definitely devised ways to make all that material eligible for transport on a passenger aircraft. And there's definitely conversations that we can have about how Asendia does that and that kind of thing. Okay. But, for the most part, I think it's one of those areas where if it's a business that you're in and a business that you want to see and grow into and explore your international shipment, conversations like that are ones we have every day, and we're happy to entertain them anytime they come up.
Yeah, if you look, John, at not that I happen to receive Amazon boxes at my house every day or so, but if you look at the ones that are, FBA, they all say Amazon Fulfillment Center on them. Right. If you look at FBM boxes, they'll say the seller's name, but it'll be the same address. Yeah. So it's really interesting and leading just into exactly what you're saying, as it has to have the seller information on there.
Thanks for joining us today on Outside the Box podcast with Asendia USA. Check back for part 2 of this conversation on October 30th.
If you want to support our podcast, the number one thing you can do is share it on your social media and tag Asendia.
That helps us get the word out, and we really appreciate it.
Be sure to subscribe and download our podcast. If you want to learn more about today's topic, email us at ecommerce.usa@asendia.com and check back frequently for new discussions on e-commerce shipping to Canada and worldwide.